It doesn't seem to have much to it. It could have been a lot better. It could have been slightly better written.
Chris Chibnall is an English. So there's like an old adage that got kind of added to, fandom stuff called inmates running the asylum. And my guess is that's been kind of done now because, it has kind of a mental health ableism thing running towards it. Essentially, it means when fans take over popular franchises or, different kind of media, geek media, and tend to put their own kind of proclivities and their interests, within their specific interests even, on the show and putting it into the narrative. I think the bigger reason it's not really used anymore is that, like, fans taking over a franchise is not that unusual anymore, especially considering that no franchises seem to stay dead, and the ones that make money are the ones that, that has been around for as long as, like, I've been a child, or you've been a child, or people in their 70s have been children. That's what stuff gets made anymore. So it's kind of a statistical improbability if you're writing about something in that regard that you're not a fan of it. Like, it's difficult to get somebody to work on Star Wars who hasn't had at least some relationship to that property. One of the best examples of this is comic books, like superhero fiction. This is a trope that tends to be in that one a lot. But at the same time, like, it's something that, outside of editorial oversight, comic writers have a somewhat of a liberty to do what they like. So, of course, they're going to have probably a pre-existing relationship to it, because it's very unlikely that you would be writing for comics unless you were a fan. This tends to be, is more specifically, not really for the movies, but more specifically for the books themselves. It's a very insular market. So they tend to just take writers who have some, connection or development there. And I think one of the ways this trope really dies in the present day is if you look at the revival of Doctor Who. Because, and especially when the show was off the air, the vast majority of people making content, for lack of a better term, in that were fans. And every single showrunner and even most of the writers were fans of the classic series when they started working on it. So they all had their own prior experiences they brought in, their own niche interests, their own way of viewing the show that they wanted to impose onto this new kind of series. Like, in the 16 years it was off the air, especially with the BBC's complete lack of interest really in doing, like, there was attempts to revive it before 2005, but they didn't really go very far. Like, it was the fans that kept this series going, so they would have a lot of say, especially when it came back. And, Russell T Davies, the first person that came back, oh, this guy made a reference to Doctor Who in his wrote a really popular show, get him on board. I know there's probably more reasons they got Russell on board. This is a joke. And here we get to Chris Chibnall, who was the previous showrunner, and he definitely brought a lot of his sensibilities and his ideas onto this show in rapid succession. And boy, were they not popular. But he's done, and we're getting a new showrunner. Same as the old, because it's Russell, he's back. And I really want to look back at what Chibnall did in his run, because personally, I never saw people discuss it really in good faith. That doesn't mean you have to like it. Most people don't. I know a lot of people who did engage with it in good faith and just have no desire to watch the show in his era again, and that's perfectly fine. You are entitled to just not like it. And I don't want to be someone who comes across as somebody who has a massive stick up their ass over people's dislike of the show, because personally, I think the Chibnall era is fine. There's stuff I like in it, there's stuff I really dislike in it, but that could be the same applied for, like, all of the era. I've only just now, and I think you're not really going to see it because my head's in the way. Here's a messy blanket. I don't know how to coordinate this at all, even though I'm staring at myself at the camera. Hi, messy blanket. I hope you weren't expecting presentation in this fucking thing. And I wanted to, like, engage with it and maybe, read into things that may not have been his intent, like certain themes I noticed, goals with the story, the character, stuff like that. Because, I think he has a particularly distinctive style that makes him stand out within the confines of the revival era of Doctor Who. For better, and for a lot of people in this fandom, for worse. Because there's a lot of, like, incendiary shit around him, like I said before, And I don't know, I never got the idea that he was malicious or, incompetent, because he's made some great TV in the past. Now, it's drama, he's more of his strength, honestly. Like, Broadchurch's a very different show from Doctor Who. I really love that show. But at the same time, I see a bloke who really loved this show and was trying to do something that, seemed to be of his interest, seemed to be something he really put his heart into, as well as trying to fit the confines of running a TV show, which, is more complicated. And as you saw from the clip that I opened this with, he taught as a teenager. So I ask, rather pensively, what kind of asylum did Chris run? Whoa, hey, yo, I switched locations. It's like I'm a real YouTuber who fucking plans out anything they do before, they hit record. Right. Caveats. Provisos. Things I wish to be wary. So I'm going to be judging this era as if it's the vision of one man. And that's never really an accurate way to, look at film or television in any kind of capacity. Even ignoring the fact that this is a show with a very long, very complicated history with a lot of people who were involved in it. I'm even talking about just within the confines of Chibnall's 3 series. There are set designers, there are production staff, there are actors, there's the composer, Seka Nakanoa. There's so many people involved in the creation of this show that, we can't really put it either the praise or the blame on Chibnall. There's even the other writers he saw the good grace to put into a room together, because writing Doctor Who is very isolating, and that was really cool of him. So again, if I am praising Chibnall or condemning Chibnall, I am praising or condemning the era as a whole, and I don't want to make it seem like, the kind of auteur kind of stuff, because that's not really how the stuff works. It's very collaborative, and I don't want it's very unlikely that people who worked on the show even see this video, but I want to make sure they know that, the work is very appreciated, because especially on the production end, because this show is, like, this era was beautiful. It's really stunning in terms of how the show tends to look, and I really want to give them props for that. And keep in mind, if anything I say here is contradicted by something said, behind the scenes by a producer or anything like that, I didn't really come into this with the idea of it being kind of a behind the scenes breakdown. It's more an analysis of the show as I see it, as it was playing along. So that's the perspective I'm coming into with this, that, as a fan watching the show, outside of the time where I obviously have to bring up behind the scenes stuff, but we'll get there. I watched a few interviews that Chibnall did after he finished the show, and that was about it. That was my research. I'm a YouTuber. When I go into negatives, because trust me, I will plan to, please keep a note that there is kind of this weird cottage industry that has developed because of reactions to Doctor Who. Specifically during this era, it was there beforehand, but it's just become a lot more emboldened since then. It's fueled by a lot of political sentiments they are reading into the show, which, that have been true about it to varying degrees of contemporary tolerances since it began in 1963. I do not acknowledge what these people say as real criticism, nor do I acknowledge them as part of the fandom when I bring them up. Finally, unless I have physically no other way of getting my thoughts out, I want to go into this not comparing Chibnall's era to the other eras of Doctor Who, in particular the last 2 showrunners. This is Chris's Who, it's entirely his baby, and it should rise and fall entirely on those metrics. This is mostly because the fandom has a very annoying habit of whenever they discuss Doctor Who to just compare it to the previous era, which I can get the logic there, but it doesn't really tell me a lot of what this show particularly did wrong during this time, instead of just saying, it bad because Moffat did good, or it bad because Russell did good. I want to say if this show failed by its own standards rather than by the standards of the 2 other guys who worked on it. This habit is annoying, and it's not conducive for what I want to do here, which is to explore the broader themes, storytelling intent, and narrative choices of a handful of years of a very, very long television show. Got it? Good. Let's get started. So one of the biggest changes in Chibnall's era is that this is the first time in the show's history an official Doctor is being played by a woman. In this case, Jodie Whittaker. Only took him about 54 years roughly, but hey, here we are. Jodie Whittaker had a mammoth task in front of her, and in fairness, she is great. She's charming and funny, and she has this kind of childlike enthusiasm and zeal to her delivery and performances that really feels Doctor-esque. I just love the energy she brings to this character. It's very reminiscent of a movie she did which I really liked called Adult Life Skills. I would highly recommend it if you haven't seen it. As for her actual Doctor, I don't know, I'd be lying if I said she was one of my favorites. One of this Doctor's biggest traits is that she is very socially awkward. And while other Doctors have kind of this thing about social niceties where they tend to eschew them if they don't suit their purposes, for 13, she seems to actually want to communicate with people and engage with people, but she has a tendency to stumble over her own feet. This is contrasted with her being kind of distant and not very communicative with her companions and with the people she seems to want to let into her life. Part of it seems to be that she doesn't want to get them hurt, as have friends gotten hurt in the past while traveling with her. And this is something that'll become a point of contention later on, but I'll get there when I get there. She is moralistic to the point of self-righteousness, and unusually for a Doctor, kind of a rule follower, especially when it comes with not messing with history. At the other end, she is utterly callous and snide with those she doesn't deem to be worthy of her kindness, in particularly returning monsters, where we get to see more of her darker side. People see this as contradictions within the character, but these come up rather intentionally within the narrative and in the dialogue, that I feel they are intentional choices of her personality. Having said that, she's really energetic, giddy, fun, and curious to the point of coming across as very like a child. She is the childlike Doctor, which is probably not the greatest moniker for me to give, the first female Doctor, but it's more in the way that her age and weariness makes her want to experience and see the world in a new perspective, a new self-perspective, in other words. And with the shadows of her past kind of pushing against her, reminding her of her own history, and as we find out, a lot of that she doesn't actually know within herself. With all this said, this era comes across as trying to break down the Doctor and what her place in the universe means. One last thing before I go on, this Doctor is more of a tinkerer than previous incarnations, which is a fun trait. Like, we see it when she builds the sonic screwdriver out of Sheffield steel, and the way she works with Tesla, and in Demons of the Punjab, where she kind of MacGyvers this device to help them out. It's a really fun asset that makes her stand out in terms of other Doctors, and I wish the show had done more with that, which is probably a phrase I will be using a lot as I go on. Anyway, talking about the series, let's talk about Series 11. The first.
He's a Kablam man! It's the what? A Kablam man!
You're just making sounds now.
Series 11 ran for 10 episodes between October and December 2018, with a holiday special, this time a New Year special, on the 1st of January 2019. This is the breaking into tradition where since 2005 they have had Christmas specials that air instead of the New Year's ones. The thing that stands out about Series 11 in terms of the general story and framework is that there really isn't one. For lack of a better term, Series 1 was essentially a page 1 reboot of Who. While this has happened a few times, especially with showrunner handovers, there's kind of a soft reboot. This one just kind of goes into a real back to basics perspective. We have the recurring thread of the Stenza, which are introduced in episode 1. There's more detail about them in episode 2, and none of this really comes back until the 10th episode, where we get the guy from the first episode, Tim Shaw, returning as the villain for that episode, the finale. In terms of other changes, we have a stacked cast here of 3 people in Team TARDIS alongside the Doctor, which is a first for the show since the 80s. Other changes include historical stories, which put way less of an emphasis on the science fiction elements, so they're not entirely pure historicals, but they're close to them, as well as, bringing in more of an educational aspect, which was the mission statement for the show when it started that was very quickly forgotten about. The character focus here is a lot different. Usually with the Doctor Companion stuff, it tends to talk about how special they are in their relation to the Doctor that turns them into an important person. And here, they're more just kind of people. I don't think either method of writing the companions is a good or bad thing. I understand why this change was made when the show came back, but here it is. This is going to be one of the more contentious elements of it because the characters don't really tend to stand out for people and tend to come across as bland. So while we're here, let's look into these characters. The Woman Who Fell to Earth, which is the premiere, starts us off by showing us a family of Ryan, Grace, and Graham. With this Sheffield family, they're in the mountains trying to teach Ryan how to ride a bike. Graham is affable and enthused, but he's very set in his ways, and he's very reticent to see things change. He's a cancer survivor, having met Grace, who was his nurse when he was in chemo. She's very feisty and outgoing, while he's a tad more reserved in Dog's body. He prides himself as a bus driver, even in retirement, and is seemingly an anorak of random knowledge he's picked up in his line of work. Ryan is Grace's biological grandson, who she has raised herself. He is directionless and clearly frustrated in his life, which has made him more withdrawn and sullen. Despite this, people tend to gravitate towards him, and he has a healthy social circle, though he doesn't let people in easily. This includes Graham, who he has a problem accepting him as his new grandfather due to trauma related to his family. His mother died at a young age, and his father is a deadbeat who doesn't seem to be that strongly in his life anymore. This tends to be defined because of Ryan's reticence to call Graham Grandad. He's the character that arguably goes through the most changes in the first two series. Yes, the characters changed in Chibnall too, shut up. Ryan is also unique within the companions because he has dyspraxia, a neurodivergency which affects motor functions and coordination. Hence his difficulty riding a bike. This will come up infrequently, which is rather mixed to me considering how hyped the reveal of this was. It's not a hugely focused facet of his character, but as somebody with dyspraxia, it doesn't tend to come to mind for me unless, the actual challenges of it are faced in front of me. Like, I also can't ride a bike. So your mileage may vary on the depiction here. I would have liked it to come up a little bit more, but I can understand, especially with, the emphasis on how difficult it is for him to do physical tasks like riding a bike and how much it frustrates him adds to his character. But I can understand if you're happy with the way it is done here. I appreciate the rep either way. Yasmin Khan, or Yaz, is a police officer from Sheffield who was an old schoolmate of Ryan's. She defines herself entirely through her job, usually going into police mode in times of crisis. Further compounding this is her fractured yet ultimately good-natured relationship with her own family, where she feels she doesn't have a voice or connect to them on a fundamental level. She would be the companion to stay on the show the longest, chronologically, and is the only one to stay in the entirety of her Doctor's run. So, right from the gate, we have a pretty significant issue. 3 companions, all new characters, not a lot of time to really develop them as people would in the space of 10 episodes. These kind of large companion teams are not unheard of, especially considering this is how the show started itself in the 60s, but the way the show was formatted was very differently, where there was more focus put on the actual spirit of the adventure, and you had these set episodes in this one place, so that's where the focus really went, whereas with the way television is formatted now, you can't really do that, and so there had to be more of an emphasis put on character work, which the classic series was kind of getting into, but the new series kind of took off its strides. This gives the show more of a precedence and interconnectivity, because without the serial format, there needs to be something to connect the audience to what's going on a week-to-week basis. To put it simply, while the companions here did have personality and they did grow, it wasn't really a priority of the show. So here's where we get to the root of this issue for Series 11. We have 3 new characters we have to explore, as well as a new Doctor, as well as new worlds and locations we have to set on these set 10 episodes, as well as introducing new monsters because they made a decision not to bring in the classic monsters until the Dalek in the New Year special. This is a lot to juggle, and honestly, the balls kind of fell out of their hands. Even by Series 12, where we were a bit more established with these casts, I don't ever think they got the balance right, and it does leave these companions feeling rather underbaked and underserved. And I like all 3 of these characters, and definitely the one who's the most underserved here is Yaz, because at least Graham and Ryan have the whole granddad thing to kind of connect to. They have this arc, so to speak, for this series, so they've a little bit more going on, whereas Yaz really doesn't have a lot, which is a shame. And this will cause a ripple as her character moves forward, and we get more development on certain aspects of her, but again, that's for later. And as I mentioned, the main arc is Grace's death at the end of The Woman Who Fell to Earth, and Ryan and Graham's different reactions of how they cope with this. Graham has essentially lost his anchor, and his wish to be useful post-retirement really kicks into overdrive on his travels with the Doc. He wants to find new purpose and not sit in disquieting loneliness after losing Grace. One of the best moments in Series 11 is when he comes back to the house once the Doctor eventually brings him back to their time in Sheffield in Arachnids in the UK, and he's sitting there hearing her voice. It's excellently shot. It really gives you the depth of sadness and loss here, and Bradley Walsh really proves he wasn't just hired for his comedic chops. If you don't know, if you're not from here, Bradley Walsh was a pretty well known as a light entertainer, so there might have been some head reticence when he was cast, but no, he's great. I love Graham, and I think he does a really wonderful job. It's probably one of the best performances out of the new cast. We tend to see him natter on a lot about history, like his and Grace's interest in Rosa Parks and Rosa, and his knowledge of the English countryside and English history in The Witchfinders. The latter even forces him to try to be the head of the group as the Witchfinder General in that episode, and he sucks at it. His conversation with Yaz and Demons of Punjab really shows that he's one of the more graciously reflective and emotional hearts of this team, and I think it's something that he really begins to accept about himself by the end of the series. It's his relationship with Ryan, however, that gives Series 11 most of its juice. Even before Grace dies, Graham can't really connect with her, his grandson. Ryan has put up all the walls, and he's not willing to let them down for this new person who may leave or abandon them. Losing Grace shoots up his resentment, and he's not willing to open himself up to new people or to empathize. Even them going on a mission with Rosa and them connecting over Grace, Ryan especially gets involved in this episode. He doesn't fully reciprocate Graham reaching out. The biggest barrier lifted is in the Saranga conundrum, where Ryan has to face his resentment with his father and loss of his mother head on when helping a pregnant man give birth. Even with this catharsis, he's still not ready to reach out to Graham, and his arc is kind of paused outside of some slight moments. Like Ryan opening up and feeling confident in, of all things, a workhouse environment in Kablam, until it takes you away. We see Grace back in a parallel world, and oh man, Bradley Walsh is heartbreaking here. He's so good as Graham. And I think there's a part of him before traveling where he may not have resisted the allure of the Solid track, but I believe him finding himself gave him the ability to move on and connect to his grandson. Ryan, meanwhile, has to look after Hannah, a blind girl who was cruelly abandoned by her father to go into the Solid track to be with what he thinks is his dead wife. Ryan says he's on a runner, which causes Hannah to retaliate, but they eventually grow to care for each other. And I think this is what helps Ryan finally drop his defenses and embrace Graham as his family. His dad made him suspicious of trusting anyone who wasn't Grace coming into his life. But Hannah's love for her clearly flawed and neglectful father helped him move past the general assumption to treat everyone with suspicion and connect stronger to the one family member who is there for him. As an aside, Eric's actions in this episode are pretty horrible, bordering on reprehensible, because he uses his daughter's blindness to manipulate her to keep her in the house. I can somewhat get past this compared to other episodes, as it's him who needs to grow and let go of his grief and reconnect with his daughter and make the effort to be a better person. It's also implied that Solid Tract has this kind of allure that drags people in if they just kind of give in to their inhibitions and grief. So they may have taken advantage of that and made him act in such a horrible way. It's not great, and I'm only giving it a pass because I really loved the rest of the episode, and I'm more to make up for that. Let's move on to Yaz, who, as I said, seems to suffer a lot from the stacked TARDIS cast. We see how bad she is as being open with herself and her family, as they remark in Arachnids in the UK that she never brought friends over. This implies that she doesn't really have any, or at least ones she's close enough to bring back to her house. It's a nice way to depict that while your family can love you and appreciate you, you can still feel isolated while being with them. And there is, of course, Demons of the Punjab. While I wish there was a bit more focus on Yaz in this episode, finding out her origins was a way to make her feel more connected to her roots, and seems to help her self-image and connection with her community. Her helping her grandmother and seeing her secret life humanizes them and makes her appreciate her family and the life she's led because of them all stronger. I love the affirmation conversation with Graham, saying that we don't know our stories as we live them, so it's best to live life in the moment. It's a very doctory perspective, if I don't say so myself. This combined with how Prem's life came tragically to an end seems to have an impact on Yaz as she's slowly gaining more self-assuredness instead of the self-image that she's imposed upon herself. The police mode, as I mentioned. Again, this is small and it's more implicit in her having a substantial arc. And there are nice moments that show her being like less involved in her job persona. Like she has a nice rapport with Lee Mack's character Dan Copper in Kerblam. While people tend to gravitate towards her in times of need, like the Witchfinders, this usually tends to be because of Yaz's police training, making her approachable. Here, she seems to have an easy, genuine bond separate to that as she's undercover as an office worker before Dan gets killed. She seems to quickly attach herself with Dan's. One of the most noteworthy rapports she builds is with the Doctor herself. Immediately upon meeting them after crashing into the train, the Doctor boosts Ryan's self-esteem and says to Yaz that they're friends now. Yaz calls the Doctor the best person she's ever met, when within this continuity has known her maybe a day or two. We see them girly bonding in the night before the wedding in Demons of the Punjab, and we see that Yaz speaks her language when she talks about reversing the polarity and it takes you away. This seems more built on necessity because Graham and Ryan needed more time together to develop their own rapport, so Yaz tend to get stuck with the Doctor when they split up for missions and stuff. Like in the Saranga conundrum, where because they're dealing with the pregnancy stuff, Yaz and the Doctor have to fight the mighty Pating. But whatever was happening here definitely caught on to fandom. What about the Doctor herself? Well, identity seems to be a recurring theme in Chibnall's run. It's interesting that there's some quasi-amnesia with the Doctor where she remembers most things but can't describe herself or specifically state her name. The Doctor being amnesic has been done before, but I find the specificity of what she can't remember here telling. Part of the reason I call her childlike isn't to be condescending. It more feels like she's trying to reset and nail on exactly who she is. We get to see her having traits that feel like she's navigating this new ideal for herself, like with the moralizing she does a lot. This tends to be very irritating and one of the things I very much dislike about her. There's that dumbass thing everyone points out in Arachnids in the UK where she's shouting at Jack Robertson for shooting the spider when her plan was to let it suffocate. Or in the premiere where she plants bombs at Tim Shaw and then gets mad at some dude for like teleporting him. And again, when I bring up the fact that she seems to be more wound up about messing with time, while the other Doctors have done this, she seems a lot more into not doing that. They show rather specifically she doesn't really practice what she preaches, where after she gives that speech for about the nth time, she saves a woman from drowning in the Witchfinders. And again, the more people seem to get to know her, the more she wants to wander off, which becomes more of an issue next series. And it's interesting, she warns her companions about not traveling with her, which isn't very Doctor-like. Another thing that seems to be focused on in this series is trying to put the idea of them being the fam and having a flat team structure, especially with the push-pull way they connect like an actual family. Ryan admires the Doctor like a little kid brother as she helps him guide towards a stronger purpose and tells him off when he's messed up. Like the Call of Duty scene, the Ghost Monument, which also incidentally is one of the dumbest scenes in all of Who history. Graham's the dad. He slowly moves to connect with everyone. He eventually breaks through and has a solid rapport with Ryan and kind of Yaz, and seems a lot friendlier with the Doc than the other two, maybe because of how much fun Grace's last days were, and that's how he relates that because of her. Yaz is more standoffish and seems to get on the best with Ryan to start off because they had more of a previous connection, and with the other two there was hints of a romance there, but I'm kind of glad that didn't go anywhere. Their chemistry didn't really read like that personally, but we have moments like where they talk about race in Rosa that shows they have a common rapport, being younger people trying to figure life out. The flat team structure is bollocks. Doctor does nearly everything, and while this is kind of called out in the next series, I don't know if this is an intentional contradiction or the writers realizing they created a scenario where the cast are meant to be more equal, but it ended with the Doctor usually saving the day or instructing everyone how to do so. And like, this is the formula of Doctor Who. I get it. But the companions seem to have a little less agency here, and part of that could be because they're shuffled here, there, everywhere, and have less face time with the main character of this show. A major theme of the series I found is when the Doctor regains who she is. She says,
"I'm the Doctor, sorting out fair play throughout the universe."
We see a series of stories that explore people unfairly pushing their dominance and superiority onto the less fortunate, and the Doctor sorting that out. We get it with the game in the Ghost Monument, the racist institution 1950s Alabama, also the space racist, the spacist He's really stupid. In Rosa, Jack Robinson interactions in the UK, the Hindu radicals, ruining Premium Bream's wedding and Demons of the Punjab, the war culture of Kablam, and then the fucking workers' rights terrorist. The fucking no. It's too much. Everyone's complaining about that fucking episode. I'm not going to bring anything new. The Witchfinders in. The Witchfinders, the solid track trying to use its infinite power to coerce people to joining them and It Takes You Away, and Tim Shaw in both the premiere and the finale. The Doctor combats bullying and enforcement of power to help those who need her. That is her goal and what she strives to do. The exception to this is the Sarangan conundrum, where the antagonist is an mindless alien. By the way, the Pating are amazing. I can never get over that it looks like the cast weren't actually told what this thing would look like in CG, so they are reacting with the most terrifying thing of the most ridiculous looking alien you have ever seen. I love them. They're perfect Doctor Who cheese. I wish they came back. Anyway, Sarangan conundrum kind of works like an antithesis of showing what we can be and what we can strive towards if we work together and then try to push our neuroses and our strives for power to kind of come into more of a perfect harmony. And this is shown through scientific breakthroughs with this hospital. It's a thoughtful reflection of the world that works well with this true line I may have made up. Though it's weird that if this is the case, it's episode 5 of 10, though it's the last one that Chibnall writes until the finale, so make it out what you will. A subthread of this is how people's beliefs and aspirations are manipulated by aggressive and self-interested forces. The most obvious examples are Demons of the Punjab, but we also see this in the Witchfinders and Kerblam. One of the biggest examples of this is the Battle of Ranskar Av Kolos, where these two powerful beings are taken advantage of and lied to by Tim Shaw to concoct his wildly convoluted scheme. This episode is crap, but it does have some interesting parallels to the Doctor's story in the next season. It also ends with a really nice speech of Jodie where she tells people to keep the faith and travel hopefully. I see this as addressing these themes. The best way to combat manipulated beliefs and people abusing their power is knowledge and experience. Seeing the world through wider eyes is the best formula, and it's a very Doctor thing to end on. Ranskar Kolos also resolves, I guess, Ryan and Graham's whole thing, even though I felt it was resolved pretty fine in the last episode. Graham goes on this murderous rampage towards Tim Shaw, even though it doesn't feel very in character. Honestly, Ryan being vengeful like this would have made a lot more sense. They work together and get the fist bump, and this is stupid and I hate it. Honestly, Series 11 is overall solid otherwise. It's Chibnall going ground zero, pushing the show to a new direction than it had been for a while. Whether it worked for you or not, you can't really deny that the man had a passion for Who and a specific vision, which I don't feel as reflective moving forward with the later series of this run. We then get our holiday special with Resolution. This is the New Year's Day one, which brings the biggest creatures, the biggest bullies on the planet who don't really start out for fair play. The Daleks return. Once again, they show that one Dalek is more deadly than several Daleks. This seems to be a recurring thing in this series, and I don't know why. Ryan resolves stuff about his dad, with a subplot where his dad comes to visit him, and I really like the scene in the cafe where Ryan stands up for himself. It does feel like he has shown a lot more of his self-assuredness and his kind of calmer demeanor by very fervently but calmly telling his dad what's what. I like that Ryan's dad is not just some monster, he's just some dude who never got his shit together, and downside of that is that some poor kid has been affected emotionally because of it. It's a nice end to Graham and Ryan's story. Ryan sees who the most important person in his life is, but also leaves room for his dad to grow and to be a part of it. This is kind of an issue because I don't really know if Ryan and Graham really have much else to go from here, and they are still around for another series. Then we got no Doctor Who for a year, which great. Thanks, BBC. I really love how you fucking do this always.
Worst Uber ever.
Series 12 ran from the 1st of January till the 1st of March 2020, with the premiere acting as an ostensible New Year's Day special. Like that series, it consists of 10 episodes and was the series that ushered in COVID, which would explain the reaction to finale because we were all stuck in our houses when that happened. Not that it would have, not been a shit show, even if we weren't all stuck during COVID, but like the cabin fever was really on high there, so it left its mark. Also, Praxeus came out like roughly about a week before the UK called a lockdown, and it's about an alien pathogen that kind of spreads out. Now it's more through birds than like contact, but it's a rather weird. The timing of that was also by pressure or design. It's hard to say. The series is a lot more kind of traditionally structured compared to the last one, where we do have a major story arc with arc episodes that build towards it. We also get two-parters back. Granted, it's just for the premiere and the finale, though you could consider the one right before the two-part finale as like the first part of a three-parter if you are so inclined. They lead directly into each other. Don't think you're missing out in patented ship flavor, however. In a rather bizarre thing, I noticed that series 11 and 12 has a surprisingly formulated pattern of the types of stories being told. Hear me out. Or feel free to call me crazy or reaching in the comments. It's just something I seem to have noticed. We have a bombastic action-adventure opening, setting the stakes and the main recurring villain for the series. A barren planet adventure with a quasi-environmental message, though the latter case is way more obvious than the former. A celebrity historical. A contemporary Earth story where a town is terrified by an animal-esque monster. A more overt social justice story, both written by Pete McTeague even. A historical with real-life figures, but more focused on the more preternatural, horror-esque elements. A more ethereal cosmic adventure with psychological insights into our companions. Finally, an explosive barren planet-faring finale with a returning villain from the premiere and more godlike manipulations and our main villain taking advantage of a massive source of power. Oh, and Dalek story for New Year's, and to even add to that, one is continuing after the other, basically a sequel story, so, kind of tracks. Again, weirdly enough, the exception to this is the Saranga conundrum. That weirdly titled bastard is trying to ruin all these patterns I've noticed or made up, I see. Now, it's hard to know if the pre-COVID Season 13 would have followed a similar pattern. Maybe would have, I don't know. If this was intentional, it probably wasn't. It's more likely it's based on the fact that Chibnall just noticed a series of stories he liked, and that's how he decided to delineate how they were told throughout the era. I just thought it was a fun thing I noticed in my weird brain, so enjoy. And to be clear, a lot of these episodes are very different from each other. It's just these are very broad connections. It's just, yeah. Anyway, back to the arc stuff, which I think, again, this is more intentional that Series 12 was always going to be an arcs one because the Timeless Child was hinted at in the Ghost Monument, where we had the magic clots mention it, which has never made sense to me. The Doctor, with all the times they've had their mind melded with like the Master or something, or had their thoughts read or something, and none of these things pointed out the Timeless Child stuff, but these clots did. How fucking powerful are these clots? Anyway, the machinations of this plot is the Master. And I gotta say, the Spy Master may be my favorite New Who Master. Sacha Dhawan is wonderful in this. He gives off this really kind of deranged, manic energy that, manages to still be really entertaining and entirely unpredictable. His hatred for the Doctor is really palpable in this one, and it's morphed into self-hatred because of the reveal of the Timeless Child. This version has an unwillingness to just accept that everything wrong in his life is his doing, and pushes it on his former friend, which I guess we get a childlike Master too. The reveal of him as being in Spyfall is one of the best they have ever done. I still cannot believe this is like the 5th fucking time he's done it, even just in the new series, and this one still got me. I did not see this coming at all. I liked his interaction with Yaz. You could see that as him reading that Yaz was closer or more preferred to the Doctor if you want, but the fact that he was such a likable character with a lot of development, it really made the reveal stick. It's a great moment. Anyway, the story arc picks up the pace in the finale for Spyfall Part 2, where we find out the Master has destroyed Gallifrey. So yes, Gallifrey's destroyed again. I hate it. I don't know what this does. It robs the Doctor of pathos of when she finds out what happens. Her people are dead, so she can't confront them about it. And also, how the fuck did the Master do this? They never explain how he destroyed Gallifrey and the Citadel and the Time Lords. It doesn't make any sense. I'm sorry. Anyway, while I did enjoy the kind of lack of familiar elements in Series 11 outside of the obvious stuff, like, the TARDIS, Sonic Screwdriver, etc., I did appreciate the fact that we are getting some more recurring baddies because the villains in Series 11 did leave a little to be desired. It's funny because the Cassavans and Spyfall are probably one of my favorite kind of Chibnall creations, and they are completely overshadowed by the Master. So yeah, I'd like for them to come back, because who knows, maybe another time they can get the potential etched out of them. Let's talk companions. I guess not much to say here, as our cast have been fully established and don't have a massively noteworthy growth, more blossoming their blossomiest by being around the Doctor. Order 55 has a surprising effect on Ryan. We see a nightmare later on that he's terrified of what happens to the planet that they find out at the end of that will end up, coming to be, and it seems to spur on more of a kind of heroic side that wants to help people and help the world. He tends to be the one this year to stand up to the Doctor the most with her moodiness, and especially the argument they have in The Haunting of Diodati. Another small detail is his relationship with his friends, in particular Tebow. He questions his absence in Spyfall and in Can You Hear Me, and he's clearly not in a great mental space, as we see he's boarded up his house. Because he has missed all this from being away, and also because the Doctor's reticence to let any of them in, it's more of an indication of his motivation to finally leave at the end of the series. So one detail about Ryan's confidence growing is him teasing Yaz about her sister liking him. This is a stark contrast to his reaction to her flirting with him last series in Arachnids in the UK. He's obviously a hit with the ladies here. He has a love interest in Orphan 55. He has a fun back and forth with the vlogger and Praxius. Even offsetting his discomfort near gay panic in the last series, we see him interacting with Jack Harkness's natural flirtiness and manages to push one back. So, my boy is getting a lot more comfortable with himself and getting round. And no, his arc isn't he learned to throw a ball. It's a callback. Get over it. You're very funny. This is one of the few instances his dyspraxia comes up in the forefront though. Graham sadly doesn't have as much to do this year. They have a tendency to make him more of a cheesy one-liner dad jokes kind of guy, which doesn't really fit his characterization of being more of a good-natured, grounded man. There are great moments where he shows a lot of concern over Ryan, which shows their growth. There is stuff about him worrying about his cancer coming back in Can You Hear Me? And that could be read as more of a motivation for him to spend more time around his grandson when he decides to leave the TARDIS as well. While I'm here, the Doctor's reaction to Graham's fears of his cancer in this episode. It's fine. People got so mad about this, the BBC had to respond. It's a story about adequately communicating your feelings, and in this, the Doctor is afraid of saying something that may have come across as unintentionally hurtful or callous. Then she assures Graham that she has heard him and she will get back to him to something more reassuring once she's had time to think about it. It makes sense for the teams, it makes sense for how the 13 is characterized, and as somebody who is constantly worried about accidentally saying something, I completely related to this moment. Get over it. Yaz is on top fucking form here, to be honest. We see her growth in being more of an outgoing and self-actualized person. She starts doing very doctory things, like going over Carniver to get more stuff out of Lenny Henry and Spyfall. This winds up with her getting transported by the Cassavans, and it shows that it's really rattled her, and we see this conversation with Ryan that displays this. I wish there was more to that than what we get, but this near death seems to have compelled her to be a lot more daring and to combat, the beings that hurt her friends or her planet. We see her getting beamed up by monsters, protecting Nikola Tesla later on. In Praxius, she's with her own kind of minor companion and, opts to go into the portal after talking herself into it. And we see her walk into the Gallifrey portal without even hesitating in the finale. So, our girl gets a lot of portal progression. We see more aspects of her mental state explored. There's a brief mention in the Witchfinders that Yaz was a victim of bullying, and she's someone who comes across as way more incensed about the cyberbullying that's happening on Lenny Henry's regrettably titled social media platform Vor. This culminates in, again, Can You Hear Me? A lot of the character's stuff seems to culminate here, to be honest. She gets probably the most prominent development her character has ever received. We find out that Yaz's interest in becoming a police officer is actually based on an incident that happened to her a few years back, where an officer met up with her after she ran away. It's implied she was going to do something to hurt herself. It's a lovely moment, but it shows how much she puts into others to help her see her way, especially as her bullying seemed to lead to her feeling more isolated and possibly a lack of confidence in her own identity. And in a way, she finds a friend that makes her see that, and maybe even more in some ways. She trades police mode for Doctor mode, and her devotion to the Doctor grows a lot more. We see yet another lovely moment between Yaz and Graham in the finale. I wish these two had more stuff together, to be honest. He repeats what Yaz said to the Doctor in Series 11 about her being one of the best people she knows, where Graham repeats that sentiment to Yaz. Given everything she went through her life, that must be something that really means something to her. We can really tell that through Mandip Gill's performance. And of course, we get the first hints of her depth of feelings to the Doctor in The Haunting of Via Diodati. She starts talking to Claire about an enigmatic person she has feelings for. Wonder who it is. We see both a display of her strength of confidence and her devotion to the Doctor when the Doctor explicitly says not to follow her, Yaz just goes along to do it anyway. And speaking of character growth, we see a brand new trait with the Doctor and her team, not telling them anything. She's naturally traumatized by what happened to Gallifrey, which is brought up more in the forefront in Orphan 55, and she continues to keep the companions out of what is going on with her. She won't tell her fam anything. This is one of the most frustrating elements of Chibnall's era because the Doctor borders on cruel in how much he withholds from others, especially Yaz. This appears to start as O plants seeds in the Doctor not talking about her past to Graham, who brings this up with the rest of the fam. After the Doctor finds Gallifrey destroyed, she's more cagey and moody, which the fam outline. This is honestly a decent setup, and it plays on the Doctor being reticent, this time taking on companions. She genuinely appears to want to not make many friendships as she did, either because of past hurt or her constantly putting them in danger. When the stuff in Fugitive to June comes out, we see some cracks in this reticence as the Doctor does admit who Ruth was, and Ryan and the others rally around her to tell her they'll be there for her no matter what. But this is intentionally chucked out the window when she calls out the flat team structure when deciding if Percy Shelley's life is worth ignoring Jack's warning. And then, nothing, not really. This is interesting, especially what the Master says, which I think sets up the main kind of thematic structure here.
Everything that you think you know is a lie.
So this is what I think the main theme is. Lies and subterfuge that benefit and exploit. Lenny Henry gives people a chance to intercommunicate in Spyfall, hiding that he's working for monsters to take over humanity. Orphan 55 is a holiday resort which, unbeknownst to people, is on an orphaned planet full of monsters and dangers and toxic shit. Tesla is considered a whack job fraud thanks to Edison's machinations and lies and subterfuge which these aliens even see through. Oh, by the way, while we're here, don't look into a lot of the opinions this man in real life held, because it makes the hero worship he receives in this episode super uncomfortable. A Gloucester tour guide is lying to everyone, even herself, and has catastrophic consequences. A scientist lies about her experiments that put humanity in danger for her own gain. A lie about a god leads to the entire human race potentially given into their own anxieties and mental anguish. Cyberman AI goes back into the past and manipulates an entire house of people into this mad space to protect them from a monstrous bully, who by contrast is deeply honest about his goals, and a war is being waged with the center point being the manipulations and lies of a madman and his goals for self-interested chaos. Which brings us to the biggest reveal in the series, the Timeless Child. I will finally talk about this. So it's a secret that Gallifrey kept that is so awful the Master killed them all in revenge for it. Ignoring how little sense this makes, he reveals this in a hologrammatic message to the Doctor once she finds her people have been destroyed again, and I just don't understand why he doesn't just, I don't know, tell her about the Timeless Child there. Does he need to get her to go back to the Matrix to explain all this? I don't know, there seems to be a much easier way for him to get this information out, or just get her to the Matrix even. I don't think he's crazy, he gets around this. They just needed a way for the finale to resolve this. Anyway, our next episode on the arc doesn't come until Fugitive of the Judum. Here, Dr. Harkness returns. His subplot is completely pointless and backs him into this corner, and they only seem to give him this reveal to basically have him do something and be relevant to him being in the episode. It seems to only be there to remove the fam, to not have them around for the Fugitive Doctor reveal. He tells them about the Lone Cyberman, and not to give him what he wants, because we need a reason for Jack to actually be worth here. He has some fun, charming moments, but it's mostly him in one room, and it's not that interesting. Especially, it's probably going to be one of his last appearances for stuff I don't really want to get into. Although it's never explained how he finds out about a Shad or the Siberian. And yes, the Fugitive Doctor. I love Joe Martin in this part. I think like she effortlessly gets into character, and I really would hope she came back more than she did. I know hopefully Big Finish kind of resolves that. And yeah, I don't really like that like it's revealed through the TARDIS box, which, you know, it's revealed later on that she is a pre-Harnell Doctor, so how does she have a police box when that's more specifically started with Hartnell's Doctor. My own rationalization is that it disguises itself like this, it cloaks itself like that, to show to the Doctor whose TARDIS it is, as in our Doctor, the present day one, rather than the future one. And I mean, dumber shit has come out of this franchise to explain plot holes, so I think it's not really that big a deal. Also, it's a way more shocking thing to see the TARDIS itself. Though it is funny that the idea is that because the TARDIS is so iconic, that it would be like people who aren't massive fans of the show, yet they reveal it through the time dial stuff from series 3, which hasn't appeared since then, which was like 9 years before this episode aired, probably more. No, it's like 13 years. What am I talking about? Then our next arc development is in the excellent haunting of Diodati, where we find out that the Cyberium and the lone Cyberman Ashad is there to try to get that back. It is in Percy Shelley's body, and the Doctor chooses to basically try to hand it back to him rather than let Percy Shelley die. I do like that we get the innocuous, seemingly filler episode that then develops into a more massive, plot important kind of stuff. Council of Geek tore into this whole idea of the Grey Man of Shelley, and one of the reasons like she really doesn't like the episode, and that's something you could really look into further. I don't know if I entirely agree with her perspective, but she argues it very, very well. That's not really my issue with this. It's that the Percy Shelley argument doesn't actually matter. Ashad basically threatens to blow up that portion of history, and the Doctor is forced to give it up anyway. So, and yeah, obviously Percy Shelley survives it being removed. So, like, cool. Moral quandary avoided, I guess. It's a great episode otherwise. Then we have the ends of the Cyber War, an impossibly cool premise that's rooted by the fact that it's meeting the unmovable object, which is the BBC's budget restraints. So we essentially just get Mad Max from Wish, but in space. We get another run around where the gang gets separated. The Doctor and Ryan run into the Grandad from Dairy Girls, and then we see the portal that leads people to Gallifrey, and the Master pops out of it, and that leads us into the final episode. Don't really like Essential to Cyberman, don't really feel the need to focus that much time on it. Except, of course, the prominent B-plot, which revolves around Brendan, who was adopted as an infant in Ireland, and it becomes a Garda, where he's shot and falls off a cliff and essentially survives this. It's deemed as a miracle, and he retires at an old age, but people around him haven't aged at all, and something happens to him when he's strapped to something. This is a particular frustration to me, because this is the first time in the show's 60-year history on the series itself that we have a setting in Ireland, and as we find out, it's not real, it's a construction. Fuck the Brits. So this has been beamed into the Doctor's head by the Master, even though the previous episode made no indication that's what was going on. But let's move on. And this is how we find out that the Timeless Child was being cloaked by the story, and this is how we find out that it's the Doctor. This has been discussed to death. In fact, you can find a podcast I did where I discuss it more recently, where it's more raw. And even 3 years later, I still don't like this reveal. And I mean, part of it is that, like, the episode itself isn't great. It's great that the Doctor just kind of fucks off and says bye to let some old fella die for her. And they try to resolve the Doctor causing all of this by saying he's the one who sent Siberian back, which doesn't really add up to what she actually did in the episode. So no, it doesn't resolve that. I don't really like how Ashad is killed. He's a really cool character with a great actor, and he just continues to get worse to the point where he's in the final episode of this era. And I probably won't mention him because his presence there is so inconsequential. As for the Timeless Child reveal itself, there are some readings I've seen people make into it. There's some interesting anti-colonial stuff you can look into. The Doctor's literally being used as a resource to empower another nation through exploitation and torture. Chibnall said there's elements of adoption in it, which I can see that, and it's really cool how, like, he was inspired by that, and you get a lot of mileage out of that. But for me, it takes away one of the appeals of the Doctor is that they are amazing and they are wonderful and they are inspiring, but within the confines of the universe, they are a small potato. Even within the confines of their own species, within their own race, within the ranks of the Time Lords, they're not that special. And that's the one thing I actually liked about Chibnall's run, is that he brought back a lot of kind of more spectral, preternatural elements, which show that the Doctor had enemies that could be a lot more powerful and a lot more mysterious than they were. And that was cool, and I liked that was more of a part of it, because I don't really think that's what it's been happening before. Again, I'm not talking about the previous eras, like I said, but, ask me about it. I just don't like the putting the Doctor on a pedestal and making it more special. And now they're not even Gallifreyan, but they're part of another species that was basically brought forward, and their energy and DNA was extracted to make the Time Lords gain the regeneration and be as powerful as they are, and I hate it. It gives them way too much special importance, and this is just a really dumb idea. We don't need to make the Doctor more mysterious. This was a thing from the 60s, but it's been long past, even before the fourth Doctor came about. There's so much revealed about them. That door has closed. Stop trying to do this, please. And the thing is, I don't care. Like, I don't care about the lore. I don't care about the continuity stuff. I don't care about the lore stuff. I don't think it's good for the character or the show to have them have this kind of special importance to Time Lord society. And the thing is, if this even gets referenced, it will probably be retconned in another era. So, I still don't like it, but I'm not angry over it. It's just a bad storytelling decision. Even if I can understand where it's coming from, even if I can understand why other people might like it, it's done, and I don't really have to think about it, to be honest. Beyond this video. So, back to the episode itself. We have that bit where the Doctor breaks on the Matrix by, basically giving himself a pep talk and a slideshow of all the other previous Doctors and the stuff from the brain of Morbius, which made everyone annoyed, I think. My issue with this is more of a thing with Flux, as it doesn't give the Doctor a lot for them to go on, because they tend to try to go through an identity crisis kind of stuff there, and they just kind of resolved it here, which, okay. And I think what they're going for with that is more like that you distinguish between self-actualization and wanting to know your origins, but they don't really make that clear. It seems to be coming across this self-actualization thing that the Doctor doesn't really know who they are and trying to figure out who they are. But again, this is more of a problem with Flux. I don't even think it works here, to be honest. It's way too soon after the reveal for them to be that kind of self-actualization, to be honest. We see the Master trying to train the Doctor to kill them both, which is very reminiscent of the coward moment from series 1, so it's nowhere near as effective. I do like the idea that the Master's whole entire plan was basically to get the Doctor. It's a suicide by cop kind of mission, and it's extremely fucked up, so fair play for that, at least. She pieces out when some old dude takes the fucking heat for her. We get kind of a funny callback to Fugitive of Jejune, where the Doctor is forced to carry out Root's sentence for her. Also, how many people are breaking into the shagging TARDIS at this point? Then we have Series 12 ending on a cliffhanger, which leads into the New Year's Day 2021 special, Revolution of the Daleks, which is a blast. I had a lot of fun. Jack Harkness is back here. It's probably the final time we will see him. And honestly, it's cool because he's a lot of fun here. And he's really good banter with the Doctor. He's really good chemistry. Jack has a really good conversation with Yaz, where she's exploring how important it is about the Doctor, the fact that the Doctor leaves people behind, because there's an 8-month gap before the Doctor returns to them. And I like the detail that she doesn't tell them that she has been gone for 50 years. In her point of view, she prioritizes their feelings, and especially because they're human, that time means a lot more to them. And she's beginning to slowly realize that, like, she's not the only person to travel with the Doctor. She's not the only person that the Doctor has, especially in her life. But I don't think she's willing at this point to give up what she has with her. And we see that through the fact that she's exploring and examining the TARDIS, which honestly comes up later on as we go more into her being like the Doctor kind of stuff. I like that this is a sequel to Resolution, but it goes in a completely wildly different direction. I don't think there's much done with the authoritarian police stuff, which it's a really cool visual image, and you could have done a little more with that, but I liked the intent here to look more into the whole lies and subterfuge thing, that the Daleks are literally using lies that politicians are telling people for their own kind of sense of security to play out their plan, so that works too. The plan of the Doctors to defeat them by getting the other kind of Dalek faction onto them and using their obsession with basically blood purity to exterminate them all is insane, and I love it. One of my favorite moments with 13 is her shuffling all the Daleks into that TARDIS from the previous episode and imploding it. R.I.P. that TARDIS, I guess, though. We have probably one of the best moments for Jodie's Doctor in terms of humanizing her in her conversation with Ryan, where she opens up a lot about her experience of time as a child, and Ryan convinces her to basically try to look into more of her past, which ends up having a massive consequence in her Destroys the World next series.
Meet history's greatest monster!
She talks about her fear of identity, which again really doesn't help the fact that this was appeared to be wrapped up, but I guess not in the last episode. We see Ryan's more settled and more assured, and he's spending more time with his friends and his father, and he's definitely a different person from when we saw him in the first episode of his, and this is actually kind of emphasized by the fact that she brings up the comment about the beanie, which I really liked. And this is why he leaves at the end. I really like how Ryan Graham is leaving his handled. I like that this was set up pretty well done. I think that Graham immediately deciding to keep his bond with Ryan instead of traveling is super sweet. I love the final shot of all of them and Yaz reasserting her devotion to the Doctor. They realize they don't need the Doctor anymore to live fulfilling lives. She came in when they needed her and helped them realize the people they wanted to be. I mean, I don't know, this feels relevant to stuff going on here. The ending with Grace is really cheesy, but I kind of like we didn't have her final appearance be that creepy nightmare that Graham had in Can You Hear Me, so fair enough. Also, Ryan still can ride a bike. He still has loads to learn. You're doing it, mate. So that's Series 12. Has a lot of highs and crashing lows. I don't find this as consistent as Series 11, but it has a lot more standout engaging stuff. And it really is which is your poison, you know. I felt like Ryan and Graham, especially Graham, were dragging the momentum down here, and they could have left a lot sooner than they did. And luckily, we do have the Doctor with Yaz, so maybe we can, you know, further... Oh, for God's sake. As I mentioned, this series felt like more of a return to what people recognize and was normal. It feels like Chibnall trying to do an RTD, but I felt like a distinctiveness of Series 11 was pushed back, and as someone who really appreciated that more than others, I missed it myself, to be honest. But I was the only one who liked that, so here we are. I do feel like they're building something, and it will continue to build as we go into next time. I hope nothing significant comes up that ruins that.
Me and you're beautiful as your unborn child.
I nearly decided to discuss the entire plot of Flux because a lot of people, through no fault of their own, because this story is very convoluted, that they don't really have a grasp on what the plot is. Instead, I decided to make it a Twitter thread. So I've linked that below. Check that out. Pause and check that out if you want more context to the story. We are moving on. Flux is weird. And like, I know I should give him more credit than I do. I mean, they made this during the pandemic where people could barely move stuff without it taking hours, rather famously. The fact that they even got a series out in these conditions is nothing short of amazing, and they should be commended for that. And this is something of an asset where they were keeping people employed in the industry when the Tories were fucking them over for payment. So, you know, that's really cool that people were allowed to eat. But like I said, I'm not going into behind the scenes stuff. I'm just analyzing what I have seen in the actual show. And it's really solid for like the first 4 episodes. Well, 3 to 4. Once Upon a Time is not that great. The final 2 episodes kill a lot of goodwill that this was going towards it. And this isn't a great sign when it's like a 6-part story. That's 2/3 of it that I don't think is, you know, good. Again, it's even half of it if you count Once Upon a Time. But I don't really think that lets down the actual arc in comparison to how it ends. When I say 6-part story, it's more of a kind of 6-part story. Like, they have Sartarans and Weeping Angels episodes, which honestly feel like they were meant to be original scripts on their own before the Flux stuff happened. This is especially the case with Village of the Angels, because you could honestly do a few rewrites and cut the 2 scenes, I think, with the other characters in the Flux stuff, in the universe stuff, and it nearly have no context or connection to what's going on in the main arc. The Sontaran stuff does have a bit more connecting to the main arc, especially with how they come back near the finale, but the Angel stuff is almost entirely superfluous to what's happening, especially as after this episode they are basically gone for the rest of the story. And it's probably not a great sign that these two are probably the best episodes in this run. And this is kind of my biggest issue with Flux, is that the actual main story about the actual Flux event is it's just not that interesting. It's like a COVID metaphor, and I can kind of see what they're trying to do here, but it just fails of really doing much with this pitch, and it's dull and it doesn't really go in a very interesting direction. I guess it should substantiate this. It's an apocalypse story where the structure of time and space are being broken down by this wave of antimatter. Essentially, it reflects on one of the biggest aspects of the coronavirus and COVID and the lockdowns, which it felt like time was standing still, that there was stuff moving forward but nothing really happening. And I think people feel like that because I still feel weird when reminding myself that the lockdowns started 3 years ago. And of course, this isn't one-to-one because, characters in the story can interact quite frequently, allowing to COVID restrictions in real life. But, metaphors are not meant to be one-to-one reflections of what they are representing, nor can they really work like that. But this dystopic future shows characters whose lives are halted and unable to move on, where time seems forever moving yet stagnant, and all bundled and hard to discern when is when. Most obvious one of these is Belle and Vinder, who are a married couple who are expecting their first beautiful, as of yet unborn child. Did he honestly think that was a normal line? Vinder, you can see with this because he's fired for doing the right thing by calling out his boss, who's the Grand Serpent, and he is forced to be stuck on an outpost away from his family, and he is stagnant even before the Flux energy hits. He's just staying there, letting time just move past him in this space. Belle fights Cybermen and is a badass and has zero characterization. Sorry. Honestly, I don't really know what these two bring much to the table narratively. I know there's a rumor or a fan theory that their child was meant to be the timeless child, aka the Doctor. And if that was ever a premise they were humoring, I'm glad it was killed. The most important thing in their arc is that it introduces the Grand Serpent, who becomes a secondary antagonist really hastily on in the final 2 episodes. I think they wanted him and the Grand Serpent to have this kind of rivalry, but they barely interact, and Vinder doesn't seem even that bothered by them meeting again, outside of him being the one who pushes him into the end, I guess. There's your arc, Vinder. Yay. He seems to have more of an animosity towards Kate. And honestly, you could read a Grand Serpent being stagnant, especially when he goes back in time to kind of found unit. He doesn't seem very happy in any of this lot, and it's just a means to an end to help the Sontarans and their subplot. But for cause him to be disbarred, his life is also being put on hold because of all this Flux chaos. Taking advantage of a unprecedented global event, or in this today's universal event. No kind of comparisons you can make to COVID there, no sir. The Sontarans are probably one of my favorite things here, and I like that they come back as kind of more of a final antagonist for Flux. They are, for the first time probably in the Revival series, at least for me, a legitimate threat, and they're still managed to be genuinely funny, and I just fucking adore their redesign.
He's so ugly! I love him!
The Weeping Angels are basically goons here, but in terms of how they function, they work well for the time-space kind of wonkery, even though they're probably made a bit too powerful here. And this has been an issue with them since Blink, because they were clearly meant to be a one-off monster, and people keep adding stuff to them, which doesn't really work overall. I always hated the image of an angel becomes an angel thing, and now they go even further by having an angel transport herself into somebody's mind because she had a vision of the angel. Yeah. And even then, that angel, Claire's angel, is facing stagnation, as our heroes are. It wants to get away from the division, but is tethered to hiding because of the power and influence that division has. Claire is the same. She is trapped with this monster in her head, but also in time because of the Weeping Angel sending her back by accident. It's an interesting mental health metaphor if you can look at it like that. That would have been nice to explore, but Claire is not really a hugely focused character here. Jericho doesn't really fit the mold here, but I just want to mention him because he is a delight. Kevin McNally fills him with such dignity but charming earnestness. And he just seems like a really nice dude who goes on a spirited adventure with Yaz and Dan once they go back in time. And it's actually legitimately sad when he dies. I guess Chibnall was just really good at writing cuddly owl fellas. Right. Speaking of, let's move on to our companions. And our new one is Dan, played by John Bishop. He's not someone who ever really found his way in life. Well, he remains charming and spirited, where you'd love to have a pint with him. He also tends to put others' needs before his own. I find his desire to be a historian really interesting because it's a profession where you give back what you learn and find out to others. In a sense, like, this one might be a bit of a stretch, but it fits with his personality. He seems like a man who has difficulty holding on a job, and his altruism usually puts him at a disadvantage and prevents him from prioritizing his own needs. While Diana's super likable, I like how casually her disability is handled, for example, and she's really fun in the passenger stuff. I wish there was more to her than just, she seems to be just Dan's love interest. Dan continues to put her on a late's end, and especially with how his engagement ended when he was younger, it seems to hurt him want to explore, and it's a fear seems to be paralyzing him. It's really sad, like, if he had acted earlier, when Di ends up getting kidnapped for reasons, I guess they just didn't want to face the wrath of evil Dan. When she's freed, but she's hesitant to start a relationship with Dan, which is super reasonable, they may have had more of a chance earlier on if he had been more open about his feelings for her. I do like that Di is the one who comes up with the plan to defeat the Flux, because the Doctor always needs ordinary people. One of the ways they visualize Dan's inability to accept help is not really something I appreciate, but we see him at a food bank refusing to take food and not having any in his own house. I get what they're doing for the character, but it implies this kind of nobility and suffering, in poverty and hunger, and it's just a bad message to get out, especially in the UK nowadays. There isn't any dignity in going hungry. There seems to be kind of some centre-right messages that sneak into Chibnall's work, if unintentionally. There's a similar one which is really infuriating to me, and that was the idea that Dan is too poor to have this super nice computer, and this assumption is validated because the computer's a bomb that the Cavernista set. Also, the Doctor is worried in a later episode about aliens coming to, like, invade Earth to run from the Flux, and I don't know, it's a super NIMBY kind of perspective for her to have.
If the Flux is destroying the universe, there will be displaced creatures who need a home, but that would mean a time of battle for ownership of the Earth.
Don't let them aliens come to Earth, Yaz. They're bad for the local community and take all the jobs. And did you know that only 56% of humans have no alien genetics? And that stat will go up. I heard in this podcast for...
Oh, speaking of Yaz, I feel like a lot of her life feels like stagnation, at least emotionally speaking. But interesting that at this point she says she's former police.
Formerly PC Yasmin Khan of Hallamshire Police.
Which means she quit the police, which good, ACAP. But it shows both her willingness to find this identity with the Doctor, and yet moving from one of these modes to another. No police mode, now Doctor mode. Even writing what would the Doctor do in an acronym to remind herself of what she needs to do. Yaz is a victim of bullying, and it makes her closed off and unwilling to face even her own feelings. Even when trying to live up to the adventurous spirit, she still can't accept how she feels about the Doctor. And we see that in the way she plays that hologram repeatedly, and Dan even sees this. But she can't get to that place yet. Particularly as the Doctor still refuses to open up with her, which is very annoying. The series does have her split from the Doctor a lot by behind the scenes necessity, but it shows her a lot being more open to taking charge, like in Atropos in War of the Sontarans. She finds the little girl in Village of the Angels, or, you know, she becomes the ostensible leader of this mini quasi-TARDIS team with Dan and Jericho in Survivors of the Flux when they're stuck in the 1910s. This lady's picking up her old man companions in style. So this Doctor story here is about how her, until recently, unknown past is holding her in a place where she is lost on who she is and what happened in those years. Her hunt for the Vision inadvertently leads to the Flux, and she learns about her own place in kind of the creation of the structure of space-time. We finally see her confront Take-Tayun, the scientist and supposed mother figure of the Doctor, who basically tortured her to extract the regeneration moment, and she is an important figure in Timeless Child lore, and the conversation sucks. Though it does bring up an interesting facet about the Doctor's relationship to her friends and her companions. Take-Tayun says she uses them. This will be examined later on. Also, Take-Tayun's costuming gives off this idea that she's kind of like a botanist. It's an interesting look, and not sure what they were trying to go for here. They can make some kind of guesses, I guess. In a story about a lack of balance of time without structured space, reflection hindered by stagnation, Take-Tayun's biggest fear is that the Doctor inspires others to be more themselves, to be better. And it's part of why she decides to destroy the universe and use that to blast her into another universe where it's implied or just straight up stated that that's where the Timeless Child originated from. I'm not sure what this story may be telling us, but it could be more interesting if it challenged the inherent good of these predisposed structures of time and space. The villains here are Swarm and Azure, a brother-sister pair who are part of the Ravagers. They experience time in this non-linear way, and they worship time as its own entity and believe it should be free-flowing in its own chaotic might. They reject the rigid, predictable structures that were set up by the Time Lords and the Mori. They're fascinating because they're highly motivated, though they suffer a lot from the story's complete lack of focus. Even though they're in every episode, they tend to just disappear and not do much for long periods of time, and it doesn't give enough time to build up this kind of threat or intrigue. And I mean, they have a coherent plan and execute it, even if it involves killing Tecteun and robbing the Doctor and, less importantly, us of any satisfaction in defeating her. And the thing is, like, the story never brings up these questions. Are these structures, even natural structures of space and time, always the best thing? The Temple of Atropos was implemented by a crew run by the demented fucker who started the Flux. Maybe there's something there that's wrong. Hell, it would put the Doctor's weirdly authoritarian streak in this incarnation to the test. She, like, starts reading out Time Lord directives to this woman. Why the fuck do you think she would care at this stage? But no, the Ravagers just want to use the second Flux events to free time and destroy reality as we know it. No question the status quo. Nothing done that justifies this whole thing even being a story. That's kind of the problem with Flux. Even if these teams are intentional, they don't really go anywhere or bring the Doctor to a place where she has answers. And when she's given less metaphorical and more emotional and more tangible answers, how this is handled is odd. So the rogue angel that went in Claire's head had the Doctor's erased memories, which is eventually put into a time dial. The story includes her getting the fob watch after the Ravagers are killed because they failed to free time with the Flux event. Time then talks to the Doctor and says,
"Nothing is forever. No regeneration. No life. Beware of the forces that mass against you and their master."
What do you mean?
It means you're fighting the meddling monk Doctor. What do you think it means? Anyway, after finding out she will die, and no regenerations, which, yeah, sure, John. She takes the watch and she drops it into the TARDIS's console. And I mean, on the one hand, she get it. She never needed these memories to move on. She just needed to be more open and dare with her friends who rallied together to help her save the world. She promises to open up Bortiaz, which, and then she says she'll leave it until she needs it. It's a reasonable step for her character to take, but on the other hand, this is the end of the Timeless Child arc. Like, we're done here. It's never brought up again in the 3 episodes that follow this. She just drops her memories. It's a massive anticlimax, especially with everything that happens. And the migraine-inducing reveals. And we just learn nothing. And that's kind of the point, that they wanted to bring more mystery, blah, blah, blah. But, like, it's not a way to conclude a story arc, is it? If there is a change in the Doctor's and her relationship with her missing past, we needed more properly laid out in the story. Instead, we get more implication and innuendo. And frankly, so much character shit is defined in Chibnall's era like this, you know, innuendo and implication. I don't blame people for arguing there isn't any. Like, there's a difference between subtlety and not exploring a character or story arc in a tangible, satisfying way. And that's Flux! Now we have only 3 episodes left.
Where did you learn to deal with your enemies like that?
You should meet me, Mom.
Similar to 2009, 2022 left us with 3 Doctor Who episodes to wrap up this era's Doctor. Eve of the Daleks aired on the 1st of January, Legend of the Sea Devil aired on April 17th, and Power of the Doctor aired on October 23rd, celebrating New Year's, Easter, and the BBC centenary respectively. This one takes the approach of exploring the most socially clueless Doctor falling in love with a companion. And to be clear, I don't love how Tasman is handled. The Doctor has feelings for Yaz. I know there's an interview with Chibnall where he uses the word unrequited, but I think he's more mistaking that for unexplored. If he meant unrequited in the way it literally means, it contradicts everything else he says in that interview. The Doctor and Yaz love each other, but because the Doctor knows she will die, she doesn't want to hurt them both by exploring this further. I've also established they've been building this up to way before this in series 12, maybe even further back than that. Though, yes, they could have explored this way sooner than they actually did. Our team here is Connection, something the Doctor's been struggling all her era. Rather than breaking down the character arcs again, let's just go through the episodes themselves. Eve of the Daleks is a slick, fun, and incredibly creative time loop story where the loop gets smaller every time it reverses. Contrasting our main pair is Sarah and Nick. Nick has feelings for Sarah, but is unable to tell her. So he keeps coming in on New Year's when she's let down by another employee. Now, Nick is weird. Like, very weird. Like, There's a fine line between quirky, adorable, and serial killer vibes when he puts stuff that was left in his apartment from his exes and labels it in a storage locker. But the actor is grounded enough to make it work, even if that turns you off. I don't blame you. Think about the weird ones that are keeping her looking at the Doctor. It's a really sweet moment. It really shows like the parallels that between these two. Though I don't think the Doctor is as odd as this gentleman is. Dogs here are fun. They have some really fun moments. I really like how Chibnall writes them. And this is actually a consequence of the stuff that happens in Flux. Doctor has a lovely speech about failing and working towards succeeding, because that's what it feels. This story is being open, even if you fail. Dan, who's used to waiting in the wings, finally asks Yaz about her feelings for the Doctor. I love Yaz's sense of relief and confusion. It actually brings up the question of what her sexuality actually is, because she could be more Demi or Ace, but it's not really something that they really are interested in looking into, especially with how late in the game this comes up. It's a heartwarming conversation and pretty groundbreaking in the Doctor having a canon same-sex love interest. Dan saying it to the Doctor is not as good as this, because I'm sorry, even if you know a person will be cool with it, don't out them to someone if they're not ready. Like, just don't do that. It's an etiquette that, like, from the fact that this is written by a cis straight man, you may not be aware of that personally, but no, loose points. Dan is a bad ally. It leads to a really gorgeous moment where they see fireworks and the Doctor looks at Yaz, and I think the kind of switch in her brain finally lights up. And they can see her go traveling together. Cool. I give them a week. Legend of the Sea Devils is about how connections can hurt us and shape us when they're gone. It's also about sucking. It's one of the most embarrassingly low-rated episodes of the show. Well, don't attribute ratings to quality. This one feels a bit deserved. But it's showing our guest cast driven by loss of their people. Ji-hoon and Madam Chang both lose their crew. One is being blackmailed over her status as a pirate queen. One is being coerced by the Sea Devils that Ching ends up accidentally releasing in the future. We also have Ying, whose father protected this Sea Devil statue for generations, and outside of like not knowing what to do after he gets killed and how to deal with those emotions, he has no sense of identity outside of that. Ching and Ji-hoon become more embittered and directionless. Jin rejects working with anyone because of this, but eventually takes on Ying and the ranks and apologizes for what happened to his father and her role in it. This isn't really explored that amazingly well, but you know, it has thematic connection. So Ji-hoon, who is been frozen for eons underneath the ocean, decides to sacrifice himself in order to defeat the Sea Devils. Dumb plan. It's another one where basically they sacrifice themselves to take the Doctor's place, which is again really weak. It's a bit better handled here than in the season 12 finale, but meh. But it does indicate a path that the Doctor doesn't want to take, dying alone, because they abandoned everyone around them. The Sea Devils are ostensibly water Silurians, but it's probably why they never worked, and like even their best televised story is only okay. He broke his people's code of honor, is abandoned by them, and is proving in kind of a hardcore over-the-top way his worth to them through this extremely dumb plan. His separate connection turns into a way more explicit monster. And this is another path you don't want loneliness to take you or lead you to. Dan takes this all to heart and reaches out to Di, and they have a very nice conversation, and they seem to have resolved the wounds they had over Flux, and I hope these kids work it out. So okay, Tasman. During this whole crisis, the Doctor blurts out that if she could be with anyone, it would be Yaz. She tells Yaz that she is one of the best people she knows, which reflects what Yaz said to the Doctor in Series 11. This leads to the beach where Yaz wants to talk and open up since the start of Eve of the Daleks. Even though the Doctor rejects the idea that they can be together, she says she still wants to travel with Yaz. And Yaz mentions her nanny for the first time since Demons of the Punjab.
My nanny says, courage is knowing something will hurt and doing it anyway.
Demons of the Punjab is a story where she discovers a massive part of her life was a lie, or what a secret in this case, perpetuated by founding conflict by colonialist machinations and ideology-driven factions, where the symbolic erasure of history is demonstrated in a watch. Now, I can imagine there's some questionable ways to take the idea that take the Yoon founding the regeneration for Time Lords by exploiting the Doctor's DNA is, you know, an entirely different ballpark to the partition of India. But having said that, I do find these parallels interesting. They have some baggage to connect, but even with the Doctor moving past that, it's not enough to help her reconcile her relationship with people as the show goes on. Because, you know, she can't settle down. The only way she can do that and settle down and become a curator is if the show gets cancelled. So the broader issue is that I find the relationship to be pretty weak, and basically it ends here. The Doctor and Yaz's companionship is more important next time. There's no real explicit reference to the romance. And I feel there's a lot of general queer blindness in this run where they feel like just having gay characters there is enough. And it's very liberal attitude towards queer representation. Look, a gay is there. You're welcome, Harvey Milk. But they never know what to do with these characters, and because they're one-offs in a Doctor Who story, they end up dying. And it adds more to the kind of inherent disposability of queer lives, which again, not intentional, but it's not there. And people, I'm not the only one who was frustrated by this. I don't really like how James I is handled. I liked you had the gay couple in Praxeus, but the queer rep is so badly handled. A lot of the tension in that episode is whether or not they would survive. And this feels again the disposability of queer relationships and the more chases compared to other straight relationships that the Doctor's had with companions where they don't even kiss, makes it feel like there's some fucking weird Section 28-esque bullshit going on here where, you know, the Doctor can't show more physical affection for Yaz because, you know, you can't show gays on a children's show, this is a weird show to push that in anyway, considering its history. But beyond that, and I need to stress, I don't think this is intentional. I think this is not a conscious decision. I think Chibnall wanted to tell the best story in the most respectful way he could, but it still comes off as feeling insincere and incredibly insulting to the audience that they are trying to reach out for. And it's a shame because I know Jodie and Mandip really pushed for this relationship to go forward, and they're a big reason why it did. So I wish it worked better on screen, but it just doesn't for me. And now we get to the Power of the Doctor, Jodie's final story in Doctor Who. Unless she comes back, well, her regeneration story, you know what I mean. And it's one I've seen people who even hate this era really ring praises to. And maybe a lot of it is the fact that it's very fan wanky and it brings back a lot of characters and a lot of references, and maybe that's what keeps them appeasing rather than the actual story, which I could get. It's a mess. It's sloppy, it's all over the place, there's way too many moving parts to be wholly satisfying, but it somehow works. And it actually makes the fan service feel somewhat purposeful. So Ace and Tegan are back here, and they both have different perspectives of how they feel about the Doctor over their departure. Tegan is pretty angry with the Doctor, especially as she thinks the Doctor sent her a Cyberman toy, which reminds her of the events in Earthshock. Ace is more willing to be more open and connect to the Doctor. A lot of this is over them having a falling out previously to this. It throws Yaz for a loop too. You know, I know she knows about companions and different people she traveled with, but actually seeing them in person, and, you know, they're older women, which means that they had traveled with her a couple of years previously. It makes her realize the reality that she can't be with the Doctor forever. The power of the Doctor is all how you can parse your relationship with this mad, brilliant, damaged being once the journey ends. And you know this because it references Journey's End. Again, this is the second time Journey's End is a reference. Chibnall must have really loved that one. Dan leaves really comically early on. I almost feel bad because I don't know if John Bishop signed on for Series 13 before everything with the pandemic happened. It's hard to say because he wasn't announced until like the revolution of the Daleks came about. But either way, really affected his ability to connect because like the specials and the Flux doesn't give him a massive relationship with the Doctor. He's honestly closer to Yaz. And I mean, I like why he came to this conclusion. It's not so much that he realized that going with the Doctor was dangerous. That was obvious from the get-go. But he has more of a life now, and he has more of a reason to stay home and not, you know, float out into fucking space, especially with him reconnecting with Di. And I think that's a good place to leave him at, even though, again, it's comedic how soon this happens, even if it does, you know, leave this overstuffed story with a bit more to go and explore. And also, why didn't you give him a house, Doctor? Give Dan a fucking house. Master's plan here, which involves him rather hilariously photoshopping himself into paintings, which is just done to get the Doctor to pay attention to him, is to basically force her to regenerate into him, or he hijacks the body. I think it's meant to be a combination of both, but like the dialogue seems to be implying something that what's happening on the screen isn't. It's very confusingly handled. Both of these, by the way, have precedence in the lore of First Regeneration and the Doctor hijacking other people's bodies and basically going on a rampage as the Doctor to frame them of doing these terrible things. His plan is to cancel her. I hope the Doctor can rock a ukulele. Again, this goes back to connection, because the Master needs everyone to see his former friend, and her friendship is verbally acknowledged here as someone who can be brought down because they're just a fraud. They have no real convictions that they claim to push towards. Like, they build up a false reputation that can be pulled down very easily. And it's the only way he can feel better about himself. That's his disgust in having her DNA in him. It's just a disgust over having someone better than him influence his life. He can't handle that. He desperately wants to be the Doctor instead of himself, and it shows the massive amount of self-hatred he has. This incarnation is defined by its connection to the Doctor, as with everyone else in the story. But even the fake fam he puts together to basically, they're joining their hatred of her, cannot break the legitimate hold the Doctor has over her friends. As Yaz says so herself, she can't help it. And the Master can't understand why people are connected to the Doctor, because she helps them change and realize the best within themselves. Realize a world far beyond their comprehension. No matter how much he pathetically begs Yaz that he can be fun. One of the ways the Master implements this is the Quaronks, a new alien species introduced as basically just a MacGuffin for everything happening in the story. It's only really there to serve as a plot, but it has this interesting thing where it takes the shape of the thing that you most sympathize with, and the Doctor sees this being as a child in a very similar fashion to the time his child was seen in the flashbacks. Also, there's the interesting parallel of the fact that this finale starts on a train, which was meant to be the plot of the New Year's Day special, but it became too expensive, so they changed it for the Dalek stuff. We first meet this new Doctor outside of the Christmas special in 2017 on a train in Sheffield this time, not in deep space. Also, it's in the Taraji system, which is a reference to Chibnall's first ever televised Doctor Who story, 42. So bookends all around. Similar to Quarren's looking like a timeless child, it's a being the Master exploits for their natural power to benefit themselves through Time Lord tech. Very hypocritical. Part of the forced regeneration trap, the 13th Doctor is in the edge where the Doctor's incarnations go once they regenerate past that point. They can't come back. She's facing the Guardians who falter between forms. Oh hey, it's David Bradley, Broadchurch reunion. And here we have the crux of it. All the Doctors, all the classic Who Doctors, except for Tom Baker and obviously the ones who have passed away, reminding the Doctor of what the greatest point is. It's the adventure that matters. We see Tegan and Ace reunited with their Doctors and showing that they never forgot any of them. And they hold on to that pain. No wonder this incarnation was so reticent to take on new companions. They could get another Adric because he died, not because he's annoying, though I guess both things are something you should worry about. While I wish Ace had gotten more of an apology from the Doctor, using their more kind of parental relationship, it does demonstrate one of the Doctor's greatest strengths, that they impart on their companions this wilder lens to enjoy life and the world through, and to be better people because of that. That's what helped Rebellion Teen Ace. That's what helped the lost and directionless flight attendant Tegan. And it's just fun from a fan perspective. I love seeing Ace with a baseball bat fighting Daleks. Outside of that, Daleks don't actually do much here. The one that betrays the race, even though that's a plot point they've kind of done before, it's interesting, but doesn't really get much to do, and they just kind of become mindless hench people after that. And the scenes with the companions and the respective Doctors, they really pulled at the guitar strings. And I love Tegan getting catharsis by blowing up the Cybermen after everything she's been through. Ultimately, this is why the Master fails. He doesn't understand that connection. We see Yaz in the apex of her doctoriness, flying the TARDIS, recruiting Vendor. We get a nice cameo from the fugitive Doctor. We see they resolve the timeless Cider Lord's bullshit by siphoning regeneration energy to reverse what the Master did. I hope they never come back. The Doctor thwarts his plans through the power of the Doctor. It's friendship, if you didn't guess. Also, Graham's here. Woo! Ryan would be, but he's shopping. So, for a top, we're the end of the world. So,
Where's Ryan?
Patagonia.
Fucking Ryan. Kate is also here, but she doesn't do a lot outside of reintroduce the Doctor to the companions. The Master dies, refusing to accept the Doctor has what he doesn't. He'll probably be back. He redirects the Quarren's energy towards the Doctor, which ultimately proves to be fatal. Yaz gets to carry the Doctor along in a kind of nice callback to the Caves of Androzani, and also gay as fuck. We also see the Doctor with her extended fam, which is really sweet. And another classic Who reference, the Croydon scene. I love how Jodie plays I Need More Time. It's so vulnerable and finally like being honest. And the second she sees Yaz, she prioritizes Yaz's feelings over her own, which is such a great statement about her doctor. And we have the lovely image of them eating ice cream over the world. Super romantic, even though, again, I already went over what I don't like about their pairing, but this doesn't help it. I don't like the Doctor and Yaz separating being the Doctor's choice. And, like, I get it. Yaz probably wouldn't be ready to see anything outside of her Doctor, but it robs Yaz of any agency in this relationship, which has been a huge problem for her in general. It's somewhat implied that the Doctor did open up to Yaz. There's a joke that Graham says that she doesn't explain anything, but that's more in the moment rather than it being a general statement about the Doctor and Yaz's kind of relationship. Especially because, like, while she does know what Ruth looks like, she would have needed to probably know what she looks like with the Doctor outfit, which is how the hologram thing comes on when confronting the Master. So that does imply there's some bit more of knowledge that she has. But even with this, she traded police mode for Doctor mode, and her ending this mode of her life isn't her choice. We'll never see her choose her own path, and that sucks. And then we have the next few moments, which I just unabashedly love. I love the idea of the companion anonymous meeting. I love that it's Graham the one that sets it up, you know, the one who had the biggest loss at the beginning of this era, unable to cope with the idea that he can create other connections, connecting all these former companions. And, you know, it's just fun to see everyone. Hi, Ian, Joe, Mel, see you soon, Mel. And, like, watching all this stuff, it hit me. I got it. Chibnall's journey from series 11 to now, as fucking flawed as it is figuring out what Doctor Who means through the framework of the Doctor's identity crises and mission statements. This feels like part of an overall narrative, if a clunkily and severely compromised one. Doctor Who is an adventure that makes lost people better. Why we see all these troubled folks at the beginning of The Woman Who Fell to Earth, and seeing how much their lives they touched and empowered here. That's their real power. We see Jodie's final goodbye, stepping out of the TARDIS. Oh, she doesn't regenerate in the TARDIS. Cool. Taking in a sunrise on this beautiful cliff. And she has these gorgeous, perfect final words. Perfect for the childlike Doctor.
Right then. Doctor, whoever I'm about to be. Tag. You're it.
Willing to explore herself, still hoping to. She regenerates into this beautiful glow of light. Oh hey, David Tennant! Broadchurch reference. I guess maybe there was no regenerations as it turns out. What? We'll find out if that's true or not.
A traditional sort of thing that people would expect Doctor Who to fall into. But I still felt that that story was fairly boring.
So there we go. Chibnall's era. It started strong. It ended strong. Just have about 29 other episodes you have to get through. That's not fair. Honestly, there's a lot of stories here I really like. Honestly, there's very little I dislike. This era is remarkably consistent, and that's kind of the problem. And that's what failed this era in my eyes. It's really samey. And that might be a consequence of the writer's room. I guess it's a good idea not to have, like, writers write for themselves. That feels very isolating. But also, when you're in a writer's room looking for consistency in a TV show, having that stuff blend into a normal tone makes sense. But not for this show, which can be something new every single week. It can be new genres sometimes. The thing is, I don't know how the script writing's handled. I could be reading more into that. But when we see from the credited screenwriters, Chibnall's name pops up a lot. In the 31 episodes, only 7 of them do not have a screenwriting credit from him. This may have been okay if, you know, he just wrote amazing sci-fi, but he really didn't. He has some good ideas, but they never really kind of proficiently come out. He seems so comfortable as a dramatist, as I mentioned before. I really like Broadchurch. And, like, we see that in his character work, but the character work doesn't seem to have a lot of room to grow because he's so laboriously exploring and explaining his science fiction. Which, yes, I didn't bring up the exposition stuff, but it's very clunky. I agree. There you go. Yet I like the characters. I like the historicals. I like the grounded feeling of this. And even with that, them exploring the more kind of cosmic stuff that you don't really see kind of get developed within this series in the new era. And yeah, like I said, with these kind of pastoral natural aesthetics, the show has never looked so good. There's stuff I really like in it. There's a lot of bad here too. But I don't know, it gets torn and feathered in the fandom rather constantly. I don't think it really deserves that. Maybe this could be recency bias and people may reappraise as it goes on. Maybe they won't. It's hard to say. Like, you're probably wondering why this topic in an era I think is just fine. Even with the concept of exploring, like, a fan with formerly negative opinions of the show, trying to explore it from his own lens, and this, again, inmate running the asylum thing. And at the end of the day, it makes his asylum run, for lack of a better term, feel a lot more insular. And I don't know if that's a great thing overall for this show. And we'll see how this goes moving forward, because there's a lot of love for Russell and what he's doing with the show. And I'm tentatively excited about it going on. I'm really looking forward to Ncuti Gatwa for in particular. I think Chibnall would agree with me, even though it probably doesn't agree with me a lot of my opinions of his run. Like, I haven't spoken to the man, but, you know, I like the potential of it. And it does bring into question if your intentions with Doctor Who can ever really be brought into full fruition. Chibnall seems like a guy very minded of the fact that he's not making a show just for him, but for a general audience. He also wants to put his stamp on it, which, you know, you could say he did. Depends on if any of the stuff is remembered, really. But like, it's kind of the nature of the show, to be honest. It's constantly changing. And with that, I think again of that clip of this kid criticizing, you know, his favorite show, not because of the whole irony thing, but I see the passion of a teenager now really matching the reality of running a television show. A cautionary tale for us all, frankly. I would probably bombard the show with bullshit if I took it over, and I don't really intend to. I know at the end, if this was a task he was totally set on, but he still tried, and I wanted to respect that. And I don't think he misunderstands Doctor Who in the way that people want to act like he does. And now there's Jodie. And one of the best examples of this is the clip they released just when Knockdown was announced. And this is the most doctory thing they have both ever done.
Remember, you will get through this. And things will be all right. Even if they look uncertain. Even if you're worried, darkness never prevails. Stay strong. Stay positive. You've got this.
This just shows me that he and Jodie got it, even if that wasn't always shown in the scripts. So I wanted to share what I saw was the heart, the effort, and the wayward spirit of this era. It's certainly not for everyone, but I think there's something to see in this daisiest of daisies. Don't let them aliens come to Earth, Yaz. Why am I Scottish? She's not Scottish. She's bloody from the north. I'm so sorry, Jodie Whittaker. I don't know why I made you sound like this.